All right, it looks like we have a good number of folks logged in at this point, so we'll kick off. So thanks everyone for joining us again for another Opportunity Zones webinar hosted by the Economic Innovation Group. I am thrilled today to be joined by a real, I would say, all-star panel of experts in the education sector, childcare sector, as well as real estate development to help bring to life a lot of the content that was in the report that EIG delivered with the support of Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on September 15th. This report very much looks at the nexus between the children living in opportunity zones, as well as how the opportunity zone policy can be leveraged to help improve outcomes for those kids. Just to take care of a few housekeeping things before we get started, this will be recorded, and so as always, we will post a blog after the webinar, and the webinar recording will be embedded within that blog. If you have any questions, feel free to insert them in that chat function down below. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, and so that is a great way to get your question popped up at the top, and we will be answering them both throughout and again at the end. And then the final thing I think is just to ensure that everyone's on mute and get ready for a really exciting conversation. Next slide. So our agenda for today, we have about an hour and a half. And so number one, we're gonna review the Advancing Education and Child Development in Opportunity Zones report. This included a number of different deliverables. Some have described it as a report within a report, but the information provided we think is really important, not only for the education and childcare sector, but also for public and private leaders who are interested in advancing child wellness and development within opportunity zones. And a lot of the content in the report can actually be applied to other sorts of community assets as well. And so just wanted to flag that as we're talking about some of the things featured, that it could be tailored to meet local strategies for other types of real estate assets or businesses that strengthen communities. My colleague Daniel Newman is going to come on, and he's going to talk about the analysis portion of the report, where we really looked at what the state of opportunity really is in opportunity zones. So what are the indicators that indicate, child wellness again, as well as educational attainment, economic and social mobility, just to understand what the environment is that these kids are growing up in. And then also, what are the community assets and the human talent that is available within these communities to help support them. We're going to talk a little bit about strategies for financing education, childcare, and businesses in opportunity zones. We went really deep in the report on that. And then my favorite section of the report, of course, is when we talk about investment-ready projects. So we didn't want this to be theoretical. We wanted the report to be very applicable and actionable. And so our guests today, our guest speakers, are going to speak to some of the projects that they're working on and provide more context about the need that they're seeing in the communities that they're serving. We will then switch over to strategies for public and private sector leaders. And so, if you're not an opportunity zone investor or a fund manager, but you are interested in using the policy to help uplift your community, what are the sorts of strategies that you could be looking at? And of course, we're going to hear from YWCA USA, that is very deeply embedded in opportunity zones throughout the nation. And so they're going to share a little bit about what they're thinking, both at a national level, as well as an example of what's happening in Baton Rouge. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Next slide. So just to break down the two different deliverables that were part of this overall project or exercise, we have first the report. So that's Advancing Education and Child Development in Opportunity Zones. It provides analysis, strategies, deals. And then we wanted to make sure that if folks are super excited about the information that's contained in the report, that they had something that they could take away to help facilitate action and facilitate next steps locally within their community. And so we put into a document that's called Strategies for Hosting and Opportunity Zones Convening our knowledge of what it looks like to host a effective opportunity zone meeting. So we provide a number of different agendas within there. We talk about who should be at the table, as well as leaving those meetings, what sorts of ground rules or next steps need to be taken in order to advance those initiatives. Next slide. And then within the report, these are the different sections. I mentioned a lot of them, but wanted to visually just give everyone an idea of the type of content that's included in the report in case one of these pieces called to you more specifically than another. Next slide. So before I hand it off to my colleague, Daniel, I just wanted to highlight some of the things that I found really surprising after he did the analysis of what it looks like to grow up in an opportunity zone. Thanks to this project, we now know that more than 7.5 million children are living in opportunity zones right now. 37% of them live in poverty. 40% live in single parent households. 22% live in a home that is not connected or doesn't have a computer with internet access. And 6% of teens, so I think we 11th and 12th grade, 6% of them are not currently enrolled in high school. And I think it talks a lot to the level of disconnected youth that potentially lives in these communities, as well as you're looking at some of these other stats, just thinking through how the pandemic and the quote unquote new normal may be affecting some of these families as kids are transitioning to remote learning, but they don't have access to a computer with internet, or single parents no longer have access to childcare because maybe their childcare center is operating at limited capacity. So what do those single parents now do when they still have to go into their job and they're not able to have the flexibility of work from home? So that's just setting a little bit of the context. And then again, as I mentioned, one of the things we did was we also looked at the assets within these communities. So really surprisingly, again, to me, 78 Fortune 500 companies are headquartered within opportunity zones. You look at what a company like Erie Insurance has done for the city of Erie, and you say that there are as many as 78 Fortune 500 companies that could be engaging in similar ways. I think it's really impactful to think about what the real potential or scope of potential is around that. And then we have a number of other statistics around the different other institutions for higher education, the number of hospitals. We know that at least one hospital in Cleveland is investing in the opportunity zones surrounding their campus. We also have information about the number of charter schools and public schools located in opportunity zones, and not just the ones located inside an opportunity zone, but located proximate to opportunity zones, so in those adjacent census tracts. And with that, I will turn it over to Daniel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. So again, my name is Daniel Newman. I'm an analyst here on the research team at EIG. So I'm just going to go into a little more detail on some of those stats that Rachel just pointed out, starting off with a broad look at the conditions in OZs today, along with a deeper look at education and children in OZs, and then rounded out with an overview of some of the many community anchors in OZs across the country. Next slide, please. So as you probably are aware, opportunity zones are some of the most distressed neighborhoods to live in anywhere in the country. So I want to focus on a few of the metrics you see here in this table. And given the current discussion on racial inequality in this country, I think the first I want to point out is that minority share column there in the middle you see. So overall, nearly 32 million people call OZ neighborhoods home, and about 57% of them are racial minorities. And digging into that just a little bit further, it's about 1 in 4 residents are Black, which is roughly double their share of the national population. And as we'll see later on, this obviously translates to a school-age population that looks quite different from the national average as well. The next two here I want to point out are the poverty rate, and specifically the child poverty rate. So while poverty in general is unsurprisingly higher in OZs, I think one of the most important figures to keep in mind this afternoon is something Rachel highlighted a little bit ago, and it's that, of the more than 7.5 million children who live in an opportunity zone, about 37% of them on average live in poverty, which is nearly double the national rate. And then the last set of stats I want to point out here have to do with educational attainment for the residents of OZs. And I think the fact that really stands out and separates OZs from other communities is that more adults here lack a high school diploma than actually have a four-year college degree. And outside of the direct economic impact of this on earnings and things like that, it's been shown that having a parent who attended college provides children with this valuable know-how and guidance that helps them navigate the college application process and any transition to college. So even if a child is well prepared academically for college, the chances of making that jump and becoming a first-generation student are much lower in these circumstances than for kids with the advantage of having at least one parent with a college degree. Next slide, please. And as a lot of research has shown, where you grew up down to the neighborhood, block by block, it has lifelong effects on people. And growing up in a low-income neighborhood really restricts upward mobility. And this leads to a whole set of negative outcomes, things like dramatically reduced lifetime earnings or increased chances of being incarcerated. So those sort of points are really related to what you see here. And I want to explain the chart a little bit to clarify what it's telling you. The data here comes from something called the Child Opportunity Index. And what that does is looks at 29 different indicators and attempts to measure at the census tract level. So, again, really looking down to the neighborhood, the quality of resources and presence of conditions that enable children to develop in a healthy way. And as you can see here, we mapped that against OZs and found that nearly 9 out of 10 opportunity zone census tracts have what's considered low or very low child opportunity scores. So what that means is that residents here often lack quality early childhood options, good schools nearby, that they lack access to economic opportunities, and importantly, that they even miss out on things like safe places to play and live. So this chart is basically just showing that relative to other communities across the country, a really outsized share of the places with very low child opportunity frequently overlap with the opportunity zones that were selected. And as we know, mobility up the economic ladder is already pretty difficult nowadays, but it's even harder to make that climb when you're coming from places like this in a community with relatively fewer resources than others. Next slide, please. So I want to move on now to look more closely at the children in OZs and their school experience. So for context, there are about 6 million children living in OZs who are going to school. The vast majority, almost 90%, are in the public school system. And that's what this chart here shows. So looking at this chart, you can see that the racial composition of OZ schools differs quite a bit from the nationwide averages, kind of as I alluded to earlier. So while white students make up slightly more than half of the public school population outside of OZs, they make up a much lower share in opportunity zones, while at the same time, Black students represent about a quarter of the public school students in OZs, which is around 10 percentage points higher than outside of zones. And outside of these basic demographic stats, I think it's also important to point out that many of these children OZs are coming from family dynamics that differ from other communities. So like we pointed out, about 40% of all children in OZs live in a single parent household. And unfortunately, many of those single parents are actually out of work, a situation that has probably become even more serious during the pandemic over the past 6 or 7 months. And what this means is that it leaves children in opportunity zones nearly twice as likely to be living with a single parent not working compared to other communities. So a dramatic difference in these places. The last thing I'll highlight here is, so Rachel mentioned that almost 1 in 4 kids in OZs lack access to broadband internet in their house. And in the world of virtual schooling, for many, that is obviously a challenge. But another way that the pandemic has affected these communities is through the availability of free and reduced price lunch programs. So, a lot of families rely on these, and the reliance in OZ communities is nearly 20 percentage points higher in OZs. And as we've seen food insecurity increase dramatically in recent months, this is another aspect related to schools that is being affected. Okay, that's it for this. Next slide, please. Okay, so the last thing I will talk about today is some of the assets in opportunity zones. So we're going to look at some of the community anchors that we found. And what we looked at, what we consider to be community anchors, are places like universities, community colleges, charter schools, hospitals, major corporate headquarters, and importantly, third spaces like YWCA locations, which we will hear a lot more about later on. So all of these really offer some unique ways to leverage the OZ policy while also helping children in their communities. And I'll focus just on one set here, and that's the colleges and universities in OZ. So we found that there were nearly 1,000 places of higher education located in these communities nationwide, and that's home to almost 2.5 million full-time students. And that's, with an additional 1,600 institutions located in the neighborhood that borders an opportunity zone. So there's a lot of assets in these places and nearby that offer a lot of potential in partnership with the OZ policy. So for this one in particular, as we saw earlier, finding ways for OZ residents to attend college is a particular goal, especially in a world where it's increasingly relevant to have a college degree to move up the economic ladder. So these anchors have the potential to offer some great options for OZ communities, along with the schools and organizations and OZs looking to take advantage of these local resources. So that wraps up my portion of this. There's a lot more data and statistics in the report, kind of framing how OZs, what's available in OZs. So please take a look and let us know if you have any questions. So that wraps up my portion. Rachel, back to you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And one of the things that I found really interesting, especially recently, as folks are looking at the impact of school closures over the long term, OECD just released a report that is estimating that the U.S. economy could lose up to 14 trillion due to school closures, and they're basically backing into that, saying that there's going to be some level of permanent learning loss. That disadvantaged children are probably more likely to experience that permanent learning loss, and permanent learning loss will then result in skills loss, which then, of course, leads to not being able to maximize your level of productivity once you're employed. And they offered the recommendation, or there was a recommendation around the best way to make up for make gains where we're currently experiencing losses is to invest in the future of education and care. And that's something that really resonated with me, especially as we were rolling out this report, because that's exactly what we are advocating for now. Just investing now, knowing that there is going to be this permanent learning loss, and trying to mitigate that long-term hit to the US economy by ensuring that there's assets that support children within the most distressed communities in the nation. Next slide. So again, taking that great information that Daniel shared, so better understanding what the needs are in these communities, as well as what the assets are that can be leveraged, we identified 3 areas where we think opportunity zones can really be applied to help strengthen the ecosystem around these children. So number 1, expanding and improving spaces for learning and care. And that could be something like creating space within a mixed-use development for a charter school. It could be partnering with a charter school to do a build-to-suit property, and doing the same with a childcare provider. And we also looked at how substantial improvement requirements could impact the ability to do the facilities expansions and rehabilitations that are needed throughout the nation, but may especially be needed as schools try to upgrade in order to be safe through the pandemic. We also think that opportunity zone capital can be used to strengthen businesses that improve the delivery of education and care. We focus a lot on education technology companies, but we also didn't want to leave out the possibility for investments into for-profit childcare providers, as well as, in order to address the digital divide, this opportunity to really make investments into either internet service providers or the general infrastructure around expansion of broadband. And then lastly, we really looked at how to how can opportunity zones be leveraged in order to build local workforce capacity? That can be, strategies for attracting and retaining talent. It can be building a pipeline of skilled workers, as well as activating latent talent. And activating latent talent, we really look at the importance of investing in childcare options. Attracting and retaining talent, we look at, how can affordable housing help to attract teachers and ensure that education professionals are retained within the community, which then support long-term learning for children. So with that, I want to move on to the next slide where I think okay, sorry, got ahead of myself. See, that's how much I like this next section of the report. I do want to note that within the report, we offer a number of tools which we hope can be helpful for folks as they think about where does OZ Capital fit within the capital stack, as well as looking for inspiration of different types of projects or investments that have happened early in market formation. And we also provided OZ investment structures. So there's a number of different ways to structure an OZ investment or an OZ fund, but there are some examples here that I think help to demystify that a little bit for folks that are interested in learning more about that. Next slide. And now we're here. Okay. So this is the section where we featured 3 projects. One of the questions that I get asked all the time is, especially from investors, even as recently as yesterday afternoon, was, where do I start? I have money that it could be eligible for OZ investments. Where do I start? In order to encourage action and maybe remove I'll just say encourage action, we really wanted to include projects that our investors can connect to today, and places that we think are going to have a real meaningful impact for the children living in opportunity zones and really hit the criteria of the different strategies we've just noted. So we're going to hear from RBH Group that has a project called Teachers Village in Atlanta, so Teachers Village Atlanta. We're going to hear from Alex Teese from DreamHouse, which is a charter school in Hawaii. And then we're going to hear from Carrie Leland, who is the executive director at Pathways, which is working alongside a local developer in Birmingham on a project called American Life Phase 2, where there can be some real opportunity to expand the availability of affordable daycare in Birmingham. And with that, Ron, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. And a really exciting report on opportunity zones. And I love that we're elevating the conversation in terms of the impact of opportunity zones and the mission of opportunity zones. The photo you're looking at, Teachers Village Newark, was built just before the Opportunity Zone program was enacted, but it's built in what is currently an Opportunity Zone. But to no surprise, we worked with then Mayor Cory Booker, and as senator, he was co-sponsor of the Opportunity Zone bill. And so a lot of the work we did in those early years with the Booker administration here locally and a coalition of folks in the state of New Jersey was work that sort of evolved into what are now the Opportunity Zones. And Teachers Village Newark was a project that was built on 92% surface parking lot. A lot of the conditions you're going to see in Opportunity Zones today. And it was, these buildings were the first ground up residential buildings in over 40 years in the downtown. And so with that task, which a lot of Opportunity Zones are going to see, we really had a dual mandate. We had the mandate of economic development insofar as, creating jobs, creating mission aligned jobs, but creating jobs and creating, simple things like activating tax rolls and creating construction jobs and building out a community that would set a precedent and create comparables for additional development on the one side. And on the other side, on the other hand, if you will, we knew we were creating something that needed to be sustainable, not only from a sort of green standpoint, which Teachers Village Newark was a lead neighborhood development, but really sustainable insofar as we realized we were building for the long term. We realized that that we wanted to set the bar in terms of future development, and so really development of quality, but also development that was going to be embraced by the community, that we thought it was super important as we were using public investments, A, but B, since we were a first mover, we really needed that community support and that community embrace. And so, really talking about social impact in a real way was very important to us and remains important to us. And so we developed Teachers Village Newark, which is a 400,000 square foot development. We needed to go upscale. Again, we were a 92% surface parking lot. We didn't want to build one building that would be an island in and of itself. We really needed to create this community overnight, if you will. And so we built 400,000 square feet in 6 buildings. 4 buildings were residential apartments over retail, and 2 buildings were what we call the school buildings over retail. Ultimately, it was 203 units of housing, affordable workforce and market rate housing. We had 140,000 square feet of new schools, 3 K through 8th grade schools, 1 early childhood learning center, and then about 65,000 square feet of retail that wound up, of the 14 operators there today, 11 are operated by minority-owned businesses, and 9 of which are women-owned businesses. So, and all local businesses that either had 1 or 2 operations, or locally in Newark, or were new startup entrepreneurs. And the workforce housing component, we were very committed to teachers. We had about, at the time, we were looking at about 5,000 K through 12 teachers, along with about 11,000 university teachers that were coming into Newark every day. And the thesis was, from an economic development standpoint, that we didn't have to recruit residents from New York or Brooklyn, that we had a cohort of teachers that were coming into Newark every day, including Saturdays, so often 6 days a week, and that if we could just capture them, that the marketing to them, the selling points to them of Newark were obvious to those teachers, and we had to capture a small universe of those teachers to just stay. And the proposition to them was, we created this quality development centered around them, educators, and education. And so part of Teachers Village is also a continuing education component that we call the Q, which has professional certification and professional development programming for teachers. It has all kinds of programming for teachers to teachers. So, ed camps, teachers teaching other teachers how to write business plans. And then and this vision actually evolved into a much larger vision, where we are now going to be introducing early next year all kinds of community offerings, like classes on wine, architectural classes on remedial English, math, and reading, classes on GRE programming for the community. So this really down at a ground floor retail space, this sort of co-working type space, but it's an education lab, if you will, that is what we call open source, where we have all kinds of, again, accredited programming, but also just programming for the community that really forms this sort of the center of this sort of education lifestyle that we have at Teachers Village. In Teachers Village, and that's the model that we're traveling with, this workforce housing component that is designed to recruit and retain teachers in the region to teach in Newark area schools in this quality of life centered around education and educators. And then in addition to that, in Newark, we actually built new schools because there was a need for it. There was a need for expanding schools. There was a need for new renovated and newer spaces. And so again, we had that we had a K through 12 component to this and an early childhood learning component to this. And as we travel across the country with Teachers Village, depending on the need of the municipality, we're there to build schools. We know how to do it. We've built several schools in downtown Newark. If to the extent there's a need for it, great, we can attach it as part of this program. But otherwise, the component that's traveling with us in the event that there's not a need for school buildings, as you know, many municipalities are closing schools, as Rachel mentioned, and our Teachers Village Chicago project is actually an adaptive reuse of a former school. So, another use of, former school buildings is sort of an adaptive reuse like our Teachers Village in Chicago. But the main components of Teachers Village is this workforce housing component with this continuing education component, this lifestyle around education and educators, and this ability to recruit and retain teachers, the best teachers to the region. And next slide, we were actually anecdotally recruited, and we're actually in Atlanta for the Teachers Village Atlanta because Newark actually recruited a cohort of teachers out of Spelman College in Atlanta, and one of the mothers of one of the teachers works for Invest Atlanta, an amazing quasi-governmental entity in Atlanta that is spearheading these types of developments. And the mother said, we need to have a Teachers Village in Atlanta. And so we are bringing our concept to Atlanta and working with Invest Atlanta, which is the types of organizations that I think the Opportunity Zone legislation is going to create more of. Sort of this, like we have here in Newark and New Jersey, these quasi-governmental agencies where sort of you have this touch point where you can go to and really really generate ideas, but also help finance these projects. And Invest Atlanta is an amazing asset for the city of Atlanta that really, sort of this one-stop shop for these types of developments. But even in smaller OZs, I think one of the benefits of the Opportunity Zone program is the galvanizing and the organization of key community stakeholders in recruiting these types of development. And in Teachers Village Atlanta, we are again sort of iterating the vision. So around this cohort of teachers, we're actually introducing a workforce housing component for seniors and creating this intergenerational community at the center of the community in downtown Atlanta. We like to be near mass transit. We like to access as many schools as possible. So our teachers living in Teachers Village access numerous schools in the municipality. Our educational components in the queue are for teachers throughout the municipality and the community in general. And in Teachers Village Atlanta, our second generation of Teachers Villages, where we have a workforce housing component for seniors and healthcare professionals, where we have this intergenerational community, again, expanding our definition of learning, and where our teachers will be able to learn from seniors, and our seniors will be able to contribute to the teachers in their community, and thereby touching our children in ROZs and in the center of our communities. And so super excited about Teachers Village and the expansion thereof across the country. Opportunity zones are the conversation around opportunity zones, the establishment of opportunity zone, the expansion of, the universe, the ecosystem of folks that are interested in these projects has been unbelievable for our efforts in expanding this project. We are looking at sites on the West Coast and various municipalities across the country. Again, opportunity zones galvanizing and looking for these types of projects, which again have economic impact and social impact, and super excited to be a part of this conversation and this next generation of the conversation around opportunity zones and really the social impact benefits and the reporting around there. I'm available for questions afterwards, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Ron. I don't know if everyone else felt it, but just listening to Ron gets me super excited. And, you know, this is a great example of how to make an investment that into a proven model that we know is going to have a super high impact in an opportunity zone. Now I want to kick it over to Alex Teese from DreamHouse. If folks are interested in doing some due diligence in Hawaii, perhaps, this may be right up your alley. Again, Hawaii has been doing a lot of great work to attract investment, and I will say the same for Alex. Alex has been doing great work to help support the kids locally there. Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. In the context of this call, doing great work to help the kids is also synonymous with I'm reaching out to everyone, asking them if A, they want to come to Hawaii and do some on-the-ground due diligence, and B, if they do want to invest, that I've had a lot of conversations about folks joining in on, you know, the work here to expand the charter school market and opportunities for kids that are outside of the traditional district in DOE, and to do so in a fun, exciting, and growing place. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Alex Teese. I'm the founder and school leader for DreamHouse Ewa Beach Public Charter School. I'm originally from the East Coast, from the Boston area. I moved out to Hawaii 12 years ago with Teach for America. I taught in the community, loved the community, went away to grad school, came back, and have been working alongside of a passionate group of Teach for America alumni, educators, community leaders to really launch and grow and build a charter school that we felt was indicative of the potential that was inherent in all of our kids that were in DOE schools. We just felt that there was an incredible amount of untapped potential, and that the kids who are in the district schools can really flourish in a smaller, more intimate, more targeted environment. I'm also soon to be a father. My wife is 24 weeks pregnant, so I'm navigating many things alongside of growing a charter school and looking out into the future and trying to figure out how it is that I'm going to be a father. So for those of you who are on this call and are wondering what the way forward is in life, in their personal lives and their professional lives, I'm glad to be on the call with you. You're not alone. So DreamHouse Ewa Beach, we are a 6th and 7th grade public charter school here on the island of Oahu. We're just outside of Honolulu, about 20 minutes or so up and over the other side of Pearl Harbor for those of you who have visited the islands and come to Oahu. We're in an area known as Kalailoa. So on Oahu, there's about 1 million people here. A majority of those are centered in Honolulu, in the urban core of Honolulu. And then there's what we call a second city, and that is the town, or soon to be growing city, of Kapolei. And just south of Kapolei is an area known as Kalailoa. And Kalailoa formerly was Barbers Point Air Naval Station. For those of you who may have a military background or military connection to the Hawaiian Islands, this formerly was a very active military base that has since been turned over to the Hawaiian people, to the Hawaiian community, and then furthermore kind of divvied up and shared amidst the Honolulu city and county, and also the state of Hawaii. So there's an interesting cross-section of ownership and converging vision for this region to invest resources from many different angles, from a state angle, from a local angle, from a mainland and continental angle. And that's really what drew us to this region, was that this wasn't an old, tired, alone region that was going to be forgotten, but instead it really looks like the next chapter of development and revitalization for the community here on the island of Oahu. So our project, as I mentioned, began back in 2012 with a simple question of how do we found a public charter school. I think we Googled it, actually. How do you start a public charter school? How do you start a nonprofit? And over the past many years, we bootstrapped our way to getting our nonprofit and getting our charter. And we started our charter school last year in 3,400 square feet of borrowed office space, tucked away in the corner, really, of a shopping plaza. And that led to the building and the facility that we're in now. which was really just a dream come true. No, no pun intended, but it was really a dream come true. We signed this lease in 2018, and we moved into this building just a couple of months ago, and it was just a miracle that the general contractor, the landowner, the developer were able to come together and push this project through these early months of COVID to get to where it is now. The slide that you're looking at is not the building that we're in now. I should clarify that. If you look into the report, I don't think there are any pictures in this and these three slides, but if you look into the report and if you go to our website, DreamHouseEwaBeach.org, you'll be able to see pictures on our social media as well, Instagram, Facebook, etc. You can see pictures of the building, but this was an old military building built in the 1940s that was revitalized into what we feel is a 21st century learning environment that we cannot wait to have children in. We're full distance learning right now, but when kids do come back, they're going to walk in and see an open concept ceiling, a lot of glass, and a lot of energy and light flowing throughout the building. Not all of our classrooms have four walls, which was really confusing to the architects when they were trying to draw. They said, well, which way is the front of the classroom? We said, there is no front of the classroom. So it kind of threw them for a loop, but it's part of what we are doing in reimagining public education and doing our charter school work here, and thinking a little bit outside of the box. And I share that because that's the type of investment that we're looking to make in the next space that we're moving to. So I do want to jump to the next slide in our deck, and I'll start to go into kind of where we're going and then where folks who are on this call or people who may be interested in a Hawaii-based investment may find themselves out here doing some due diligence or following up with me via LinkedIn or email or hopping on a phone call or a Zoom to kind of kick the tires and lift the hood on DreamHouse a bit and on the investment proposal. But what you see in front of you is the OZ tract on the left, and what you see on the right is a zoomed in version of where our current site is, DreamHouse Ewa Beach, our public charter school, grades 6 and 7, and where we are hoping to grow into our high school. So we'll grow out to 6, 7, 8 next year in our current site. And then a couple blocks away, you can see, I don't know, maybe 300-400 yards away is another building that is very similar in structure, in size, and footprint, and condition as the building that we are in now. So just for comparables, the building that we're in now, they started demo on in February, and we had our certificate of occupancy in July. So we have a very motivated landlord and developer, a great general contractor and whole team of folks who are ready to get going on this new site. It's just a capital partner and an investor to come alongside of us to move that conversation forward. And that's why I think that there's an interesting intersection here between the investment that someone is able to make in DreamHouse and the impact that they can have. The investment in this project, as you can imagine, would one be the opportunity zone benefits that would come alongside of the investment, but also growing our school. We're starting to grow from 200 students this year. And as you can see, the brief timeline, we'll open our high school in 2022, and then we'll grow all the way out to a 700 student middle and high school. So this is the very beginning of 5 years of linear growth that we are really, really excited about. And then lastly, in terms of the investment side, real estate in Hawaii is not going anywhere. So this would be an asset-backed investment, the land, the building, the improvements, and like I said, real estate investment in Hawaii, I think is one of the sound components of this opportunity, alongside of the impact. The impact is creating additional public school seats in the community, creating jobs, and also being a model and a vision for the future of public education. The charter school segment and sector in Hawaii is growing in terms of enrollment, and we are the newest charter school in Hawaii. So we're helping lead the way into what we see the vision and the direction for public school chartering in Hawaii is going to look like and feel like. So there's a brief snapshot of the actual project. Big broad strokes. This is a deal that could be done, in under $15 million. So if someone is looking for numbers, or like I said, back of napkin numbers, buying the middle school and buying the land and developing the high school, creating jobs, creating 700 public charter school seats, and being a partner in this story, in this region, I think really ties together nicely for the right partner out there. And lastly, what I'll just do is extend, like I said, a very open and welcome invitation to reach out to me for a phone call, a Zoom. As I said at the very beginning of this call, if you are interested in visiting and coming down and seeing our school and seeing the vision that we have for public education and seeing yourself alongside of that vision and help walking us forward and walking alongside of us into the future. I certainly welcome that as part of this project. So thank you, Rachel. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on the call. And I'll be here, able to chat. And then obviously you can follow up via email, LinkedIn, phone, Zoom, Pony Express, whatever other ways that you might want to get in touch with me.
Thanks so much, Alex. And as Alex mentioned, definitely head over to their website. I think, Alex, the first time we spoke, you were in the middle of the construction site and there was, buzzsaws going on behind you. Yeah. And I've been able to see the pictures of the newly renovated space, and it is quite gorgeous. So head over to their website, get a hold of Alex if you're interested in learning more, for sure. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Rachel.
And so for our last project, I have to admit, I am super excited that my path, and this is not a pun, but my path is crossed with Carrie Leland from Pathways. They are doing really important work in Birmingham, and now there's the potential for them to partner with a new Opportunity Zone project. And so I just want her to spend some time talking about what the real need for affordable childcare is in Birmingham, the work that they're doing, and then how this could potentially cross-sect with a project that is moving forward locally. Carrie, take it away.
Okay, I think I've got myself unmuted and on video. So I am Carrie Leland, and I'm coming to you from Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham is the most populated city in Alabama. It is located in Jefferson County, which is the 5th largest county in our state and the most populated county. Birmingham has a progressive business climate. We have a devotion to social justice. We have a very rich history with civil rights out here. We are a progressive city. We look at things progressively. It's a great place to invest. It's a wonderful place for things to happen first. A lot of first things have happened in Birmingham, including the Veterans Day Parade that we all celebrate. And the nickname for Birmingham is the Magic City. And I think that's perfect because it takes a little magic to make things happen, and it takes a lot of magic and serendipity to make things happen for underserved populations. So I encourage those who are listening to really consider our project in Birmingham is a great place for investment because there is something magic about the Magic City. And I think one of those things that is going to be just a sense of pride for the Magic City that happened here first is this project, Pathways Early Learning Center. I want to tell you about Pathways first. I'm the executive director of Pathways. I have been working in shelter services for over 20 years, working with people who are homeless and victimized, and it's my passion. I love it. I'm always thinking about ways we can serve this population better. And Pathways is over 30 years old. We serve approximately 1,600 homeless women and children a year. We have a vision of a Birmingham free of homelessness. I think it is horrible for people to be homeless. And during this time of COVID, we've heard about being safer at home. And home has become a place of respite, a place where we can go when the world is too much, when there's a pandemic at our door. It's where we go so that we can limit our exposure to things like COVID. But it's also really highlighted the need, particularly around people who don't have a home. And home is the most important word to a lot of people. And to be homeless is a tragedy, and it deeply affects people who are homeless. And I can tell you that it deeply affects children. And sometimes when we talk about homeless children, we talk about them as being part of the family unit with the homeless parent. And a lot of our services are designed for the homeless parent. But we want to reimagine a center just for homeless children to address the unique needs of homeless children. So our program focuses on serving those who are homeless according to HUD's definition. And I want to tell you what that is so that you understand the population I'm talking about. This means the night before you slept outside You slept in a place not meant for human habitation like your car or an abandoned building, or you slept in an emergency shelter to get off the streets. And so that is who we serve. We have been doing that, like I said, for over 30 years. We're one of the oldest homeless service providers in Birmingham. We have a lot of experience. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm super excited to tell you about Pathways Early Learning Center and how it will meet a major gap in services to homeless children, not over here, but something that can be replicated across the nation. Okay, next slide. So many children in Alabama experience homelessness, and I'm sad to say of the total population in Alabama, based on our census from 2018, we know that for the total population of children under 6, that 1 in 23 children in Alabama under the age of 6 are experiencing homelessness. And what we know is that the largest concentration of homeless children in Alabama are in Jefferson County, and particularly in Birmingham. So we have the most homeless children in Alabama right here where I am, right here in this opportunity zone where Pathways is located, and the children that we're talking about are the most at risk. And I will tell you, there is no child living in an opportunity zone that is more vulnerable than a homeless child, and particularly a homeless child who is aged birth to 5. And we know that less than 3% of children who are homeless are served by Early Head Start or the McKinney-Vento funded early education programs. The national average is 9%, but in Alabama, and here where I am in Birmingham, we have 3% being served. That means 97% of Alabama's homeless children are not being served by an early care education program. Okay, next slide. So here's our vision. We have a vision of an innovative partnership to close this gap. And so one thing I want to tell you just as a practitioner in this field is that homelessness in and of itself significantly impacts children's health, their education, and their overall well-being. Homelessness changes the way you look at yourself and the way you look at what's possible for you when you are a child. It becomes an identity for you. And I started really thinking about that in a big way, and how at our day shelter, which is a daytime center for those living on the streets and in emergency shelters, they come to us for daytime programming. We have children less than school age who are not accessing these voucher-based programs in early learning centers. A lot of times those are opened up to people who are low income. Low income is homeless is included in there, but so are some other things. There are some reasons that they're not accessing this. One is because there's a transient nature to being homeless. There's a real emergency right now component to being homeless. People may be staying in one shelter and go to another. They may be on the street, get into a shelter, run out of minutes on their phone, whatever. So I'm not saying it's the fault of any one particular system that they are not accessing these opportunities, but the truth is they're just not. And so how can we close that gap? And I think what we need to do is bring high quality childcare, first-class pre-K. Alabama is well known nationally for our first-class pre-K. We have the best in the nation. We need to bring that directly to homeless children at the level that homeless families receive services. And so we spent about 2 years developing this plan for what would be Pathways Early Learning Center, which is to bring this service to Pathways, because we are serving people who live in nearby emergency shelters, people who live in our own shelter programs, and those on the street. And I don't believe that any child who is homeless needs to be walking around on the street. I think there is a better way that we can take care of them in an early learning center where we have high quality early learning opportunities available. So we have decided that an innovative partnership with the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education was needed, and that partnership was accepted. And when we start this project, we will be working very closely with them as a pilot project. And again, this is something that if we're successful can be replicated around the nation. It can serve as a national model for the provision of early care and education to homeless families and children. So what does it mean to have homeless childcare? What does it mean to have early learning opportunities for homeless children? Here's what it means. It means it's low barrier entry. It means from day 1, 2, or 3 of homelessness, you are able to enter into childcare, into a pre-K classroom. It means that there's a trauma-informed approach to the care. This center is exclusively for homeless children, so there's not a compete with children who are not homeless. Because it's exclusively for homeless children, it can exclusively address the needs that homeless children have that are unique to them. We can provide emergency child care. Sometimes we know that childcare is costly to a family, and I'm talking a family who has provision. And the cost of childcare itself can prevent families from maintaining employment, particularly one parent. Sometimes will decide the cost is too high and to stay home. When you are homeless and when you are the only parent, not having childcare becomes one of the additional barriers that keeps the family in homelessness. So we can have emergency childcare so that the parent can start putting the pieces back together that are required to obtain housing, that are required to maintain employment, and ultimately lift the family out of homelessness. Early childhood mental health services are important because, again, I told you homelessness will almost define the way a child looks at themselves and their value and what's possible for them in the world. Also, a parent coaching, parents as teachers is very important. I have never met a homeless person who doesn't want to be a good parent. Never. Not in 20 years. I do not believe that this is an issue of people not wanting what's best for their children. Homeless parents want absolutely what's best for their children. And I want to be able to create this program that brings what's best for their children to them directly at the level that they receive services. And so parent coaching is a part. There'll be a home visitation piece after the family achieves housing. Strong emphasis on parent leadership. And then the first class pre-K classroom that is for homeless children. We currently do first class pre-K in Alabama on a lottery system. Our first class pre-K, because it's just for homeless children, they won't be competing in that general lottery. But here's some of the things that we need. Funding, of course, that's one thing. We have been awarded some funding to get started. That's been very important. Early care and education expertise. I'm delighted to say that the Alabama Department of Human Resources, the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education, and a wonderfully innovative program called Birmingham Talks, which is about the brain development of infants. We are partnered with them, and so we have a lot of that early care and education experience to guide our program. And then space. We are going to start out in a temporary location, but we need a space. We need our own space to stand alone to be able to serve more children because we can only serve 25 starting out where we are. We can serve around 50. And one of the, when we go to the American Life Phase 2, which is with Ed Tichelli and his company, and American Life Phase 2 is a workforce development housing opportunity in Birmingham. He has already done American Life Phase 1, and that is actually ready for tenants to move into some of that. Phase 2 is coming, and it should be around 2022 when it's ready. We can potentially have some space there where we can go up to 50 to 75 children. But that's one thing that is our greatest need, to really robustly meet the needs of homeless children, is space. Okay, next slide. If we have a next slide. Yes. So this is a picture of the building, American Life Phase 2, and it has the workforce housing. Of course, there will be childcare for homeless children. One of the benefits is the rehabilitation of this building that's been vacant in downtown Birmingham for a long time, and there's truly a revitalization of downtown Birmingham. It's very beautiful. Ed Tichelli has been a major part of making some of these abandoned buildings beautiful and for a purpose that serves the community. There'll be affordable homes. And I can tell you, the bottom line is a generation of tax revenue for the city, and that is true. But what we're talking about with the early learning center that Pathways will have is a different kind of revenue for the city. And that is because we know when we shorten a child's experience and a family's experience with homelessness, so the earlier a child is when we get the family out of homelessness, the better chance we have of that child not being a homeless adult. Data has shown us that. We know that. So we're talking about being able to deliver a tangible, immediate help, which is free childcare. Childcare that is immediately available at no cost to homeless children, a high quality learning opportunity that is as wonderful as what their paying peers get. So not something that's second rate, but something that is excellent for children who are the most at risk and the most at need. That is going to bring a return to the community that cannot be measured, because what we're doing is we are transforming possibilities and futures. And so I do think the tax revenue for the city is an important piece, but I think the human capital piece of the return, when we change what a child thinks is possible for themselves, when we change what's possible for a family, I just think that can't be measured. And so that's what we seek to do. Low barrier childcare and early learning opportunity that is immediately available at no cost for homeless children. And it's all happening in an opportunity zone. So that is what's going on at Pathways.
Thanks so much, Carrie. And, you know, folks may have noticed that this project is called American Life Phase 2, and that is because this is the second development by Ed Tichelli and team in Birmingham. The first one is the highly celebrated American Life Phase 1, in which Opportunity Zone Capital was used to advance that project. And I believe that they are partially leased up. It's workforce housing. They're partially leased up at this point. And I think that they're going to open pretty soon here, if not this month and next. So very excited to see that team continue their great work down in Birmingham and continue to work with great nonprofit partners like Carrie and Pathways. So I think we can go to the next slide. And this is what I noted earlier around, okay, so maybe you're not an investor, right? What if you are a anchor institution, like the number of anchor institutions that Daniel mentioned earlier, or a local policymaker? What are sort of your options to engage and support and encourage these types of projects and activities? I won't go too deep into them. They're listed here for you as well as in the report, but just to really demonstrate that not only does everyone have a vested interest in supporting these communities, but they can also play a role and catalyze those efforts. One of the really great community anchors that we featured in the report is YWCA. I'm going to turn it over to Liz Lopez. I do want to note that Liz and I have known each other for years, and we both met each other while we were working in the community development financial institution sector. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to continue to partner with her in our different roles here at different organizations. Liz, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, and we are incredibly excited to be part of today's webinar. So again, Liz Lopez with YWCA USA, and I serve as the Senior Director of Social Impact Investing and External Affairs. YWCA has been around for over 160 years, and we have been at the forefront of both economic and social issues impacting women, children, and their families. We currently have over 200 YWCAs nationwide in 44 states and also DC. The way that we are structured is that we are a federated model. So each of our YWCAs are 501c3 entities. Currently, we serve over 2.3 million women, children, and their families. And as it relates to some of the discussions that we've had about childcare, we established our first childcare facility in 1864. What some people may not know about our network is that we may be known for our childcare and domestic violence services. We're actually the largest provider of domestic shelters, but our network collectively owns about $1 billion in real estate assets. Our YWCAs, most of them own their headquarters, but they also may either own or lease 1 to 10 facilities where they provide services ranging from entrepreneurship to counseling to affordable housing, childcare, and many others. If we could please go to the next slide. In 2019, we launched our Opportunity Zones map. Because of the network that we have, and because we had identified that 85 YWCAs were headquartered in opportunity zones across 33 states, we wanted to create a tool where those who wanted to invest in opportunity zones will know where we were located, the type of services that we're providing, and for them to really see us as the community anchors that we are and trusted partners in the different communities that we serve. We could please go to the next slide. A little bit about those YWCAs. They served about 680,000 women, girls, and their families. 54 of those YWCAs currently have childcare centers across 26 states. And what we've done for the map in order for it to be useful to you is you're able to download a list of all 85 YWCAs headquartered on opportunity zones. It also includes their census tract information, but we've also been able to map out which ones are located in a new markets tax credit designated area. And we currently have 22 that are qualified and 72 that are in severely distressed areas. We could please go to the next slide. Thank you. And this is just a preview of all the 85 YWCAs that are headquartered, along with the city, state, and census tract information. Next slide. We wanted to highlight and also give you a little bit of background about our childcare centers. We currently have, as I mentioned, 54 that are located in opportunity zones, but as it relates to our overall network, what we really envision the role that YWCAs and the YWCA could play is that we may have YWCAs that are looking to buy property into opportunity zones and therefore leverage the program that way. Or YWCAs that may have different facilities and can partner with others in terms of whether it was to provide an opportunity for other businesses or to be able to provide for expansion and renovations. And then we have other YWCAs, as is the case in terms of the first one that has been able to take part in an opportunity zones project, where they are currently, they will be leasing space as part of a mixed use development property. This is really an exciting opportunity for us because it showed the role that we can have as a community partner in a mixed development that had really been in an area that had been the life for the African American community. The way that this project came about is that YWCA Baton Rouge will be leasing space as part of a mixed use building. And in terms of the services that we will be providing will be childcare. And over time, they are expecting to be providing services to 160 children. The building will also have affordable housing. So it's really an opportunity to have different components in a building from mixed-use property that also includes a childcare facility. As really the report highlights, a lot of the things are things that our YWCAs have been at the front and really seeing firsthand. Because of COVID-19, many of our YWCAs were asked to keep their childcare centers open because they were the ones that were being used for first care responders. What we do envision as part of turning the corner around COVID-19 has been that because we've been around for 160 years, most of those properties are also fairly old. And we do see potential, as we did with this deal, for other YWCAs to have the need to lease other properties where they will continue to provide childcare services. And again, in terms of opportunities to partner for you to really think about as you're doing developments and think the role that YWCAs can have in terms of us being that community partner that could be there, whether it's with a childcare center or with an entrepreneur center or with an incubator or even providing affordable housing for women and children. In terms of other components that we have also been able to identify as it relates to opportunity zones is that we have seen our YWCAs being responsive to the needs of the community and really addressing that 22% of children that currently do not have access to reliable Wi-Fi at their homes. Because we already had the presence in the communities and we had childcare centers or after school programs. What our YWCAs have been doing is to ensuring that they have areas where students can come in and take advantage of Wi-Fi, to begin to working with schools as to how, as the community partners that they are, could assist teachers to be able to provide on-site assistance to children, not only with Wi-Fi, but with other types of services in order to ensure that they're able to get their homework done. So we are just incredibly excited to be part of the Opportunity Zones discussion because we truly see ourselves as a partner that has the opportunity to work on deals like the one that YWCA Baton Rouge was on, but also because we have been longstanding partners in the communities. We know firsthand the needs of those communities and can really be a partner in terms of informing how deals should be shaping out. And if there are any questions, I can be reached at ella.lopez@ywca.org and look forward to the Q&A. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, so 85 points of contact in 33 states. And if you see your state or your community listed once you go over to the YWCA Opportunity Zone resource page and you're interested in learning more, again, highly recommend reaching out to Liz. Next slide. Just wanted to remind everyone that strategies for hosting an Opportunity Zones convening document is available for you. It's on the same landing page as the report. And I think the next slide shares that landing page. Perfect. And with that, I think we have about 20 minutes, maybe a little bit less to do Q&A. I'm gonna kick it off as I like to do just because it's moderator's privilege with a question that I have and which I think is really important. And so if our panelists want to come back on video, that's great, or stay off, whatever you guys choose, but you're welcome to do so at this time. So the question that I have is, I mentioned the $14 trillion number earlier in the presentation. This permanent learning and skills loss could lead to a $14 trillion hit to the US economy. That's at the macro level. What is the cost of inaction in these communities at the personal level and at the community level? Like, what does this look like if we do not respond as a sector, if we do not respond as a nation to the needs of kids and families located in opportunity zones, especially in the wake of the pandemic?
So Rachel, if you want, I can take that on, but it's really losing a generation. I mean, these are children that were already in need of a range of resources that the pandemic has only really amplified. And that's why there is such a huge need right now to ensure that currently many parents may be working at home, but we know that that is going to be ending, and what we need to do to ensure that childcare facilities are up and running and those people run it and have all the resources that they need. Access to Wi-Fi has been a huge thing, and what else can we do in terms of coming up with creative ways to really engage partners? Because what we've learned, and thank you for this report, is that a lot of the needs are very unique to each of the communities, and therefore that is going to require very tailored responses to each one of them.
Thanks, Liz. Anyone else want to tackle that from your seat?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly here, Rachel. I think really well said, Liz. And this is a moment that I think all of us as a country, really as a globe, but if we're thinking about the US, have an opportunity, again, no pun intended, have an opportunity to make a really big difference with any type of investment. I don't want to say we're at the bottom of anything, and in one particular way of looking at our our time on this earth, or our time as professionals or as leaders in our individual spaces. But this moment, an investment right now in an opportunity zone seems like the ROI would be far more than another time. And I think it's just a really critical time for all of us to look at what it is that we can do in this moment to really get us past these troubling times.
Yeah, well said, Alex. And investments into opportunity zones that are aligned with the original intent of the policy, for sure. And we know that there's plenty of ways to do that. A number of them were highlighted during this webinar, so really encourage folks to think about that as well. All right, I just want to remind people, we have that Q&A box where you can ask questions. There's been a number of questions that we have answered throughout the webinar. So if you're curious what other folks are asking, pop into that. But the last question that I'll ask, and this is a little bit maybe of a softball or touchy-feely question, but why are you guys passionate about this? Like, I've seen the energy, I've seen the enthusiasm brought to this conversation and throughout my time working with everyone. Like, what about this really matters to you, especially in this moment, as Alex just noted?
I'll jump in here. I think, and to the, when I think about your last question, I really look at it from the sort of opposite end of the coin, which is, and I've always have, which is that it's a missed opportunity, right? I mean, there is a significant portion of our country that's just not participating in the economic development engine that it is. And so, when I think about from an investment side, folks are chasing emerging markets for higher returns, risk-adjusted returns in foreign countries. I mean, gosh, you can have those risk-adjusted returns here in our country and couple it with the fact that you can make a difference in your own community. It's really a no-brainer from my standpoint. And I think just that, we've had these issues for decades, decades upon decades. And so the recent, COVID and our recent national dialogue has brought these issues to the surface, but they've been here. And when I say the lost opportunity is because we have solutions on the local level. Here in Newark, New Jersey, just recently we were showcased as having the most beat the odds schools in the country. That was not the case just 10 years ago. We know how to do it. And with good schools comes, food safety and healthier lifestyles and quite frankly, innovations here that we've made in Newark, in policing, in community policing. And so, so we on the local level, we know what to do. We have good examples across the country. And so I think when you think about opportunity zones, I think when you think about this sort of national dialogue, I think it's a missed opportunity to not really jump into this fully. And so that's what's exciting, right? I mean, we are 7 miles away from New York City. I had plenty of opportunities to develop there, and a lot of people think I'm nuts for not. But I honestly, getting up in the morning and putting a capital stack together that has 2 lines on it, equity and debt, just doesn't work for me. I need like 11 lines here, and I need complicated financing, and so the reason for that is not for the sake of just being complicated, which maybe I am, but the reason for that is that when we build these things, and we just finished a beautiful social impact project in Newark, New Jersey with Rutgers, the Honors Living Learning College, really special school where they're recruiting a cohort of students, really recruiting cohort of students out of community colleges and distressed neighborhoods in urban New Jersey, and really creating a social infrastructure, an educational infrastructure for these kids. And we were selected to build the home. And we just, and these buildings are not easy to build, right? You're in urban areas. You come across cemeteries, you come across, you're building up next to other buildings, they're very complicated build projects, but we just walked through it the other day and reminded of the reason for why we do this. You're doing the hard work anyway. You might as well roll up your sleeves and do something that's meaningful for the community. And I'll leave you with just this. You know, we built Teachers Village Newark with that in mind. We wanted to create a precedent for the community. We wanted to create something that would make a difference in the market. And since Teachers Village Newark was built, we've catalyzed over $1 billion, almost close to $2 billion of additional development in the downtown. It's another $5 billion in the pipeline now. And really quality development, and really a conversation around what other social impact do these buildings bring. So affordability is just the start of it. First source hiring, and local construction jobs, really just the beginning of that conversation. And so to not only build a building, but to really have impact beyond the buildings is a truly exciting foray. And I recommend it. I recommend it for everyone.
That's great, Ron. I mean, my main takeaways were complicated capital stacks, complicated building processes, really just intentionality, right? Being intentional about what you're doing. If this were easy, it would have already been done, and there would have been a private sector solution that didn't require a tax benefit perhaps associated with it.
Yeah.
So a great question to folks who have been learning about opportunity zones, leveraging opportunity zones. I know that these are all sort of new projects with a lot of potential. Has there been a surprise as you have walked down this road? Any sort of lessons learned that you could share with the group? Okay, maybe we'll put that on pause. I've been surprised by the community response and like the number of folks that maybe have been community development entrepreneurs who weren't in the community development sector prior, but have really been called to action around the policy. And Ron, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I think one surprise, I think the real surprise is, and maybe not so much a surprise, and maybe it was the intentionality of the legislation, but the organization with community stakeholders has really opened up a much larger sort of, you know, when we look across the country for opportunities, it really opened up the arena for us because there's just business stakeholders, private and public stakeholders that are getting together and really trying to recruit projects to their neighborhood. So that's been super exciting in that front. I think the interest from sort of the retail investor, this sort of, you know, we've had great institutions in this space like the Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group and Prudential Social Impact that have been doing this stuff for years. But and sort of this sort of ecosystem of CRA lenders have been doing this type of work. But I think that this legislation has been very successful in opening this up to the retail investor in a way that I think it was imagined. But it's interesting. The reason it's opened it up to the retail investors, not so much the tax benefit, which is, you know, nice, but it's really tail wagging the dog for the investor. And so what's been, you know, sort of very advantageous of the program for us is that those complicated capital stacks I was just talking about, that retail investor will stay at the table long enough to try to understand it because of the tax benefit. So it's not necessarily making them sort of incentivizing them to invest, but them understanding what we're doing and creating quality real estate developments in these emerging markets. It keeps them at the table to understand what we're doing as opposed to just sort of, giving it a glance and not staying committed to a process with us to understand it. So I think I'm surprised about how little they care about the tax benefit, although it's part of the consideration. But what it does is it's actually getting them to understand our capital stacks and understand these developments, which has been quite successful for us.
Totally agree. And we've seen the emergence of these sidecar funds that are basically small dollar equity funds for retail investors that, you know, aren't tax advantaged vehicles, but can invest alongside opportunity funds. to ensure that residents and businesses can literally have a stake in the project and benefit from the appreciation of these investments alongside Opportunity Zone investors. And so there's a great organization called Small Change, which is really taking a look at that. And I always talk about the need to do sidecar funds that are modeled similarly. And one of the other questions we had, which we answered, but I just want to flag, because I think it's important and it speaks to the same point around how can you ensure that any sort of appreciation or wealth built in the community through OZ investments is retained locally. We talk in the report about exit strategies and some considerations for exit, especially as it relates to first right of refusal, which of course is negotiated at any front end of the transaction or lease, sellback leases, as well as lease to own. These are all strategies that I think should be considered and advised on with your legal counsel, but they're important to mention because I think that they are strategies that groups should be armed with as they start negotiations. All right, how much more time do we have? Okay, running up on time. Let's see. What role can community land trusts play in being innovative financing partners? And how can foundations use their PRIs or program-related investments and MRI mission-related investments to support businesses in the early stages of OZ? I will note that in the report we do discuss specifically how funders can support the entrepreneurial ecosystem and businesses. We talk a lot about how they can support local innovation campuses, as well as seed accelerators or incubators that are specifically geared towards smaller fund managers or startup fund managers that are having difficulty with the barrier to entry. So there's a cost to entry as a fund manager, and some of these incubators, like what we're seeing in Colorado with the OZ Capital Accelerator Program sponsored by the state of Colorado, is helping to break that barrier to entry with businesses. And we're also seeing it for Opportunity Fund in some examples. So check out the report for more information about funder engagement. Curious about community land trusts, whether anyone's seen examples of how that can be meaningful in this space.
I mean, I think in both, sort of the community land trust, I think, figuring out projects around particular parcels. I think that's the best way to, again, you got those public-private stakeholders galvanizing around the opportunity zones. Nothing like throwing a piece of land in there and, sort of creating a process to see what kind of proposals you get and start, getting community support around it and start to get some financing around a particular project. So, I mean, that's, sort of one way to get involved. The other, in terms of the PRI, I think there's a few things. I think in the first instance, I think there's a tremendous need for subordinate type financing. Our Teachers Village in Hartford was completed because a coalition of state agencies provided really favorable subordinate financing. And so I think, from PRIs, they can really create some gap financing, if you will, for these capital stacks by providing all kinds of subordinate loan terms and then sort of, and can recycle the money over particular terms. And so I think that's one example. But I think where they really get, and sort of really to the point of the entire discussion here is that when we did our local businesses in Newark, New Jersey, we realized pretty quickly that the SBA program just doesn't work for those types of businesses, right? The businesses that we were trying to recruit, they were just too small, and they may have operated in Newark for 2 or 3 years, and that's the operator I want for my Newark business, as opposed to someone who has 5 or 6, in the region that are a much bigger entity. And so, when we think about creating something lasting for the community, and making sure that the community participates in these projects. Well, entrepreneurship at the retail and storefront level is a huge opportunity. And we need financing sources for those types of for those types of entrepreneurs. And so whether it be credit enhancement for the first couple of years, whether it be support and capital improvements, very hard dollars to lend around from financial institutions. So no blame there. I mean, it's difficult to underwrite this stuff, but the PRIs would be a great place for them to encourage that entrepreneurship. And it's a very difficult skill. You know, you're not underwriting a capital stack, which a lot of people can do and hire a lot of people do. You're really underwriting people. And you want, you know, and sort of, and make, you know, and we're living it now. I mean, we, you know, in Newark during COVID, we have these entrepreneurs that are rolling up their sleeves and really figuring things out, and in partnership with them, you know, making our way through this period. But you know, I'm so thankful that we selected these energetic folks that sort of roll up their sleeves and are pivoting and figuring things out. And so very hard to underwrite that stuff. And I think that on a PRI basis, there's a way to do it that if you're, you know, sort of underwriting a bunch of tenants, you will have some defaults and so forth, but from a PRI standpoint, it should be a very interesting, there can be a very interesting program around small businesses, which in all of these projects at the ground level, you want to build. And so there's a huge opportunity there to promote entrepreneurship, first source hiring locally, and really sort of activation at the community level.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. A great question from the audience, really appreciate it. And a great call to action, timely call to action, especially around what the funding community can do to help support a lot of the businesses and residents and opportunity zones. We are right at 3:30. I want to thank our panelists, not only for the time taken today, but really their time that they've provided to us over the course of the past 6 months in developing this report. And really just encourage folks to take action. This is meant to be a resource you can return to over and over again, not to sit on the shelf, but maybe sit on your nightstand or your computer table, what have you. But reach out to us if you need anything. We're very happy with the results of the report, and we're excited for it to be a resource and used throughout the nation. With that, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.